Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're going on a quest for some real wisdom. And who better to guide us than Marcus Aurelius in his famous Meditations? But there's a bit of a twist. You see, Meditations wasn't actually written for us, for the public. It was more like, well, a private journal. Like just his own personal thoughts and reflections on, Stoic philosophy and stuff.
It's almost like we're getting this sneak peek into the mind of an emperor, right?
Right.
Wrestling with all those big life questions.
Exactly. And what makes it even more fascinating is the setting. I mean, this guy's not writing from some peaceful retreat. He's leading the Roman Empire.
Talk about a high-pressure job. The sources we're looking at really highlight that. Wars, political intrigue, you name it. Even a plague ravaging the empire. It's all happening while he's writing this.
Wow. Yeah, that's intense. He was thrown into that role too, right? Like not exactly something he was planning on.
Yeah, there's this real sense of him carrying the weight of the empire on his shoulders. And that tension, that contrast between his public responsibilities and his personal philosophical leanings, I think that's what makes meditation so interesting.
So before we really dive in, can we maybe do like a quick Stoicism 101, for those of us who maybe haven't really explored it before?
Sure. It can seem a bit intimidating at first, all that talk about virtue and accepting fate. But it's really having a moment now. A resurgence, almost.
Right, like it's becoming popular again. I wonder why that is.
Well, maybe because Stoicism at its core is about focusing on what we can control. Like our own thoughts, actions, reactions. And letting go of what we can't control. Finding strength within yourself in a world that feels, well, kind of chaotic sometimes.
That sounds pretty relevant to all of us, right? I mean, who couldn't use a bit more of that inner strength these days?
Exactly. It's a philosophy for navigating those really tough times.
Okay, so let's get into meditations itself. One thing that really jumps out is this idea of living in accordance with nature, which sounds kind of vague, honestly.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? But for the Stoics, it was a really specific thing. Like, it's about understanding our place in the universe, acting rationally, focusing on what benefits the whole, not just ourselves.
So it's not just about hugging trees and stuff.
Not exactly. It's deeper than that. It's about understanding that we're part of something bigger and then aligning our actions with that understanding.
I see. So like there's this quote in Book 1, "Whatsoever proceeds from the gods immediately, that any man will grant totally depends from their divine providence."
Right, and that divine providence for them, it wasn't necessarily about a specific god or anything. It was more about acknowledging that, there's an order to the universe. Things happen for a reason, even if we don't always get it.
So does that mean we just passively accept everything that happens, even if it's unfair or bad?
That's a great question, and that's where Stoicism gets really practical, I think. Because remember, it's about focusing on what we can control. We can't control those external events, but we can control how we respond to them.
Okay, so it's not about being passive, but about choosing our response.
Exactly. And that's something that Marcus Aurelius wrestles with throughout Meditations. He's constantly reminding himself to stay focused on virtue, even when he has to make tough decisions.
It's like he's using Stoicism as this framework for decision-making, right? Both as an emperor and in his personal life.
Exactly. And that's something that can be applied to, well, basically any situation, really. It's a mindset, a way of navigating challenges with wisdom and grace.
Okay, so we've got this living in accordance with nature, acting rationally, accepting what's out of our control. What else can we learn from Marcus Aurelius? What other wisdom can we find in Meditations?
Well, one thing he talks about a lot is death, which might sound kind of morbid, but he doesn't approach it with fear, actually.
Yeah, there's that quote in Book 8, "Whatsoever dieth and falleth, however and wheresoever die and fall, it cannot fall out of the world."
It's like he's acknowledging that death is, well, a natural part of life, right? It's a transformation, not an end.
I see. So instead of fearing it, he's basically using it as a reminder to live fully in the present.
Exactly. He doesn't dwell on the past or worry about the future. He focuses on making the most of right now, living virtuously, fulfilling his purpose.
Speaking of purpose, I came across this quote that really hit me. It says, "Not as though thou hadst thousands of years to live, death hangs over thee, whilst yet thou livest, whilst thou mayest be good."
Wow, that's powerful. It's like a call to action, isn't it? He's urging us to, to really make the most of our time, to focus on what truly matters.
It's easy to forget that,
Yeah.
like get caught up in the day-to-day and lose sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah, I think that's why Marcus Aurelius suggests we, think about death regularly, not in a morbid way, but just as a way to clarify what's important, live with more intention.
So if death is natural and we shouldn't waste time, what does he consider a life well lived? What does that look like, according to Marcus Aurelius?
For him, true happiness, what the Stoics called eudaimonia, it comes from virtue, not from things like wealth or fame or anything external.
It's about inner goodness, like acting in accordance with our values.
Right. External stuff, those are just like indifference to the Stoics. They don't determine our true happiness, whether we're doing well or not. What matters is our inner state, our character, our commitment to being good.
Maybe this is a good point to bring in Shunto. Marcus Aurelius's rhetoric tutor. We have some excerpts from their letters, and it's really interesting to see how their personalities and worldviews kind of clash.
It's almost like comic relief in a way. While Marcus is deep in these Stoic thoughts, Fronto's all about eloquence, the beauty of language, a very different focus.
I bet they had some lively debates. I mean, we have these snippets where Fronto is just praising Marcus's writing like crazy, calling it more refined, more delicious than anything he's ever read.
Fronto loved the drama, that's for sure. But you can also see the real affection, the respect in his letters. There's a real bond between them.
It shows a different side of Marcus Aurelius, right? Even emperors need friends, mentors, people they can connect with.
Definitely. And their relationship, it shows that even the most serious people need those connections, humor, lightness, all of that.
So we've got Marcus Aurelius wrestling with big ideas like life, death, virtue. And then we've got Fronto, adding this touch of levity, a bit of fun.
It's an interesting mix, for sure. And it reminds us that even when we're searching for wisdom, for virtue, there's still room for connection, for laughter.
Speaking of fun, how about we talk about how Marcus Aurelius dealt with difficult people? Because let's face it, we all encounter them. And he doesn't shy away from giving advice on that, does he?
Oh, no, he doesn't. And his approach is surprisingly forgiving, too.
He was an emperor. He could have just, gotten rid of anyone who annoyed him.
He could have, but that's not the Stoic way. In Book 10, he advises him that offends to teach with love and meekness and to show him his error. But if thou canst not, then to blame thyself, or rather not thyself neither, if thy will and endeavors have not been wanting.
Wow, it's pretty deep. So it's about understanding, like trying to see things from their point of view.
Exactly. Instead of getting angry or resentful, try to understand why they're behaving that way.
And if we can't teach them, then we look at ourselves, right? Are we part of the problem? Could we have done something different?
Yeah, it's about taking responsibility for our own part. We can only control ourselves, not other people.
So we're starting to get a better picture of Marcus Aurelius and his Stoic philosophy, but what really fascinates me is how meditations also gives us these glimpses into his personal life, his struggles, his aspirations,
It makes him feel more human, right? More relatable, even though he was an emperor. He's not just talking about these abstract ideas, he's living them. Or at least trying to.
And that's what makes it so powerful, I think. Because if he can find peace and purpose in the midst of all that chaos, leading an empire and everything, then maybe, just maybe, there's hope for the rest of us.
And I think that's a great point to pause and reflect for a moment. What are your initial impressions of meditations? What's resonating with you so far?
What really stands out to me is this whole idea of finding a center, like a sense of inner peace amidst all the craziness of life. Yeah, it's like we're constantly bombarded with information overload these days and all these pressures, external pressures. It's hard to not get swept away by it all.
And I think that's where, Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism come in, because it's not about suppressing your emotions. That's a common misconception about Stoicism.
Right, like people think it's about being these emotionless robots.
Yeah. Exactly. But it's not like that. It acknowledges that we experience all these emotions, but it's more about observing them. Understanding them, choosing how we respond instead of letting them control us.
So instead of just reacting with anger or anxiety or whatever, we can acknowledge those feelings, but then choose how to act.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine being able to respond thoughtfully instead of just reacting. That's a pretty valuable skill, whether you're an emperor or just, trying to get through a tough day.
That reminds me of that passage in Book 5 where he talks about waking up in the morning and reminding himself that he's here to do a man's work. I guess even emperors need a little pep talk sometimes, huh?
Totally. But it's more than just a pep talk, right? It's about purpose. He's reminding himself of his duty, his purpose, to serve something bigger than himself.
And that idea of purpose, it comes up a lot in meditations, doesn't it?
Hmm.
So, like, what does he say about finding that purpose, like that guiding star for our own lives?
He doesn't like give a step-by-step guide, but he does talk a lot about self-reflection. Looking at your motivations, your actions, making sure they align with your values. He also reminds us that we're all interconnected, part of something larger.
So it's less about personal ambition and more about how our actions affect others, how we contribute to the common good.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not about like withdrawing from the world. It's about engaging with it, but in a virtuous way, a meaningful way. He talks about how the earth is so generous, so patient in providing for us, even when we, kind of mess things up.
It's like he's expressing gratitude for like the ground he walks on.
Right. And it's a really important message, I think, especially today with, climate change and all these environmental issues.
Totally. But self-reflection, it can be kind of tough, can't it? Like sometimes it shows us that, well, that we've messed up, we've fallen short of our ideals. How does Marcus Aurelius deal with that?
He's really honest about it, actually. He acknowledges that even the wisest, most virtuous people make mistakes. He even admits to having, troubles and anxieties, moments of fear, suspicion, things like that.
So even an emperor philosopher has bad days, huh? That makes me feel a little better.
Right. It shows that he's not suggesting we have to be perfect. He actually emphasizes that living virtuously is a process, like a constant striving to be better. He advises himself and us to dye our souls with good thoughts, to remember that it's always possible to live well and happily.
So even when things are tough, we still have a choice.
That's the idea. And, Marcus Aurelius really believed that by focusing on what we can control, our thoughts, our actions, we can cultivate inner peace, resilience, no matter what's going on around us.
Which brings us back to that idea of inner peace, something we all seem to be searching for.
And for Marcus Aurelius, that peace comes from aligning ourselves with nature, with reason, with that sense of a larger order. He talks about those who live in accordance with nature being led and driven along, as it were, by God himself.
It sounds almost like a kind of surrender, a trust in something bigger than ourselves.
It does, but it's not about being passive. It's about being active, doing our part, but also recognizing that we don't have all the answers.
And that's a hard thing to accept sometimes, right? Like, we live in a culture that values individual achievement control.
Yeah, I get that. But maybe that's why Marcus Aurelius is still so relevant today, because he offers this different perspective, a way to find peace in the middle of all the chaos. And it's not just theory, it's practical.
I really like how he draws on all these different sources, philosophers, poets, even comedians. He uses them all to illustrate his points.
It makes meditation so much more interesting to read, don't you think? It's like this conversation, a dialogue between Marcus Aurelius and like the entire history of human thought.
And he's inviting us into that conversation to,
Yeah.
grapple with these big questions about life, death, meaning. And it's amazing how relevant his words still are, even though he wrote them like 2,000 years ago.
I know. It's like he's tapping into something fundamental about being human. The search for meaning, the challenges of leadership, the desire for peace. These are things that we all deal with no matter what time period we live in.
And speaking of timeless themes, we can't forget about Fronto. While Marcus Aurelius is exploring Stoicism, Fronto adds this playful, almost comedic energy to their dynamic.
Totally. He lightens things up, reminds us not to take ourselves too seriously.
There's this part where Marcus Aurelius is writing to him about this legal case involving Herodes Atticus, and he's urging Fronto to focus on the facts, not personal attacks. And Fronto's response is basically, "Let me at him. I want to unleash my rhetorical fury." It's hilarious.
It's like a classic personality clash. Marcus, the Stoic, wants fairness and reason, while Fronto just wants to, have a good verbal fight.
It shows that even the most serious people need those relationships that challenge them and make them laugh.
Definitely. It humanizes Marcus Aurelius, too, right? He's not this, distant, untouchable figure. He's a guy who values loyalty, enjoys a good laugh, and he even lets himself be persuaded by Fronto sometimes, which is pretty cool.
It's nice to see that even, an emperor philosopher can be swayed by a friend's charm.
Yeah, for sure. It reminds us that we're all human, with our own quirks, our own contradictions.
So we've got Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, seeking wisdom and virtue.
Yeah.
And we've got Fronto, the flamboyant rhetorician, bringing in the humor. But there's another aspect of meditations that I find really interesting. The humor, especially when he talks about fame and reputation.
Oh, yeah. He has this really dry wit, especially when he's talking about, like, our tendency to be self-important.
He basically says, look, you might be famous in this one little corner of the world, but the earth is just a tiny speck in the grand scheme of things. It's like a reality check, right?
It puts things in perspective, that's for sure. All our worries about status and reputation, it all seems kind of small when you consider the vastness of the universe.
But we still get caught up in it, don't we?
Yeah.
Like we all want to feel important, leave our mark on the world.
I think that's natural. It's part of being human. But Marcus Aurelius reminds us that true significance, it doesn't come from like external validation. It comes from living a virtuous life, aligning our actions with our values, fulfilling our purpose as, rational beings.
And that purpose doesn't have to be about like these huge achievements, right? It can be found in everyday life and how we treat people, the choices we make.
Exactly. He emphasizes kindness, patience, even when it's tough. It's about finding meaning in the ordinary, in the everyday practice of living well.
All of this sounds great, but it's easy to get caught up in, the busyness of life and lose sight of these things. How do we make these Stoic principles more practical, more applicable to our daily lives?
Well, Marcus Aurelius actually recommends having certain precepts or dogmata ready to go, like a doctor with instruments, for sudden cures.
Like a mental toolkit for dealing with life's challenges. So what would be in that toolkit? What are some key takeaways from meditations that we can actually use?
I think the most important one is to focus on what you can control. Your thoughts, actions, your responses to things, cultivate virtue, act with kindness, remember your connection to the universe, all of that.
And don't sweat the small stuff.
Right.
Especially things you can't control.
Yeah, definitely. And, even emperors have bad days. Be kind to yourself. That's a big one.
That's a good reminder. Be kind to yourself.
For sure. And don't forget to, enjoy the present moment. Life is short, so savor the good times. And even in the tough times, remember there's always something to be grateful for.
It all comes back to fronto, too, doesn't it? While Marcus is deep in Stoic thought, we have fronto, reminding us to enjoy life, to find joy in connection, in humor.
It's such a great balance. It shows that we can still, pursue wisdom and virtue without losing our sense of humanity, our ability to laugh.
The relationship is like a reminder that even philosopher emperors need friends who challenge them, make them laugh, and remind them to, enjoy the journey.
Absolutely. Speaking of journeys, we've covered a lot of ground with Marcus Aurelius and his meditations. What stands out to you the most from all of this?
For me, it's the idea that the pursuit of a good life, it's a journey, not a destination. It's about learning, growing, becoming a better person. And it's not about being perfectly stoic. It's about engaging with the world, being virtuous, being meaningful, and accepting that we're not perfect.
Yeah, I love that. And maybe that's where those glimpses into his personal life are so important. We see him struggling with grief, loss, the burden of responsibility.
Yeah, it really makes him relatable. He's not this perfect, untouchable figure. He's just a guy dealing with the same stuff we all deal with.
Exactly. And it adds this depth to his writing, this vulnerability that makes him feel more like a friend, almost, like someone we can learn from, even though he lived so long ago.
There's this one line that really struck me, where he talks about a happy man. And he says, a happy man is someone who in his lifetime dealeth unto himself a happy lot and portion. It's like he's saying happiness isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we create.
Yeah, I love that quote. You've hit on a really important Stoic principle there. Happiness or eudaimonia, it's not passive. It's about living virtuously, doing the right thing, even when it's hard.
So it's not about waiting for good things to come our way. It's about choosing to find the good in whatever situation we're in.
Exactly. It's about changing our perspective, focusing on what we can control and letting go of the rest, which is easier said than done, obviously.
It makes me think about that contrast between his public life as emperor and his private life as this philosopher. I mean, he's leading armies, making huge decisions, but he's also wrestling with these deep questions about life and death. How do you even balance those two things?
That's a really interesting question. It makes you wonder about leadership, right?
Yeah.
And the challenges of being a good leader while also finding personal fulfillment.
There's a strong sense of duty in meditations, he really believes that his job as emperor was to serve something greater than himself.
Yeah. I agree. And that sense of purpose, that commitment to something bigger than just your own ambitions, I think that's really crucial for any good leader at any level.
It's a good reminder that leadership isn't about, power or being in charge. It's about using your influence to make a positive difference in the world.
And that difference doesn't have to be like this huge world-changing thing. It can be in the small stuff, how we treat each other, the choices we make, the values we live by.
So Marcus Aurelius's wisdom isn't just for emperors and leaders, right? It's for all of us. Anyone who wants to live a better life, more meaningful, anyone who wants to deal with challenges better and find their purpose.
Absolutely. And it's incredible how relevant his writing still is all these centuries later. I mean, we live in a crazy world, right?
Yeah.
Lots of uncertainty, lots of stress. But meditations, it offers a way to find some peace, some calm in the middle of all that.
It's like a reminder that we have a choice, a choice in how we react, how we see things, how we shape our lives.
And that power to choose, it's within each of us.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Marcus Aurelius's meditations, we encourage you to, keep thinking about these ideas. Maybe pick up the book yourself, explore it, see what speaks to you.
Remember, finding a good life, it's not about reaching some endpoint. It's a process, a journey. Be kind to yourself along the way. Don't be afraid of challenges, and never stop learning and growing.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep seeking wisdom, keep asking questions, and keep trying to live a life that you can be proud of.